Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, Chinese e-commerce hits its stride as Alibaba takes the title of the world's largest retailer. We take a look at the industry's exciting potential and its obstacles. Then we sit down with Kevin Rudd, who twice served as the Prime Minister of Australia and now specializes in geopolitical issues. He shares some insights on the sometimes tricky Sino-US relationship. We start today's show with Alibaba, now the world's largest retailer. From their first online transaction in 2003 to being a business worth 3 trillion yuan, Alibaba has moved step by step toward stimulating the country's purchasing power and creating a new form of economy. Experts say Alibaba's growing value reflects China's shift away from the investment and export-led growth towards consumption and services.
A milestone for the e-commerce sector. Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba Group Holding Limited said that it has officially become the world's largest retail platform, with its total online trading volume surpassing Walmart's annual sales in the fiscal year ending March 2016. According to Alibaba, its online trading volume accounts for 10% of the overall retail volume in China.
We have created 15 million jobs in retail trading. Based on our huge amount of transactions, we have constructed a big data calculating and cloud computing system. That's what we call consumption-driven innovation in technology. Relying on this most advanced technology, we can fully analyze the needs of the market and dig into rural areas to unleash the potential purchasing power.
Alibaba has already set a goal to achieve an annual trading volume of 6 trillion yuan by 2020, and to help 90% of its retailers increase their operational efficiency. It has taken the company 13 years to reach this position, since its online shopping platform Taobao launched in 2003. Alibaba said in a statement that the record-breaking gross merchandising volume, GMV, shows that the world's largest retail marketplace has shifted from offline to online.
E-commerce should not be interpreted as an additional sales channel for producers. It has redefined customer services in every way. Producers are encouraged to improve their business process to better suit consumers' demands. Today, there are few people who want to stay in the traditional business model.
A more flexible business model and the convenience of opening shops online are making it increasingly easy for manufacturers to sell their products without having to invest a lot of money in building sales channels, which is beneficial for small enterprises lacking in capital. And without geographical limitations, e-commerce platforms like Alibaba make people's lives more convenient. The transformation of an economic development model is always difficult. Ideally, China's feverish online sales expansion will continue, and the internet economy will become a primary driving force for economic growth, but it will not be plain sailing. Since e-commerce is still relatively new in China, it is expected to be integrated more with traditional industries amid the country's economic structural transformation.
For more discussion about Alibaba, we are joined here in the Beijing studio by Professor Wu Chengqi from the Guanghua School of Management at Peking University. Welcome, Professor Wu, to our program. And Professor Liu Baozheng, Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics at the University of International Business and Economics. Welcome as well, Professor. Meanwhile, joining us from New York, we're having Professor Max Wolf, Professor of Economics from the New School University of New York. Gentlemen, welcome to the three of you. Certainly it's a big news that Alibaba has already surpassed Walmart to become the biggest retailer of the world. Is that necessarily going to indicate a trend, Professor Liu, that online is likely to be the real thing?
Oh, definitely, because the consumer behavior has been dramatically changing, and the type of security for online payment has also fostered the online purchase shopping spree. And then the government has also been highly supportive to lead this direction. So this is really sort of innovative approach in the business model and also in the growth engine for an economy.
Not only about Walmart, Professor Wu, it is also winning over Amazon in a way, because when it comes to the real amounts of purchasing power, China certainly is much bigger than that of the United States and the American consumers. But how much does it have to do really with the market share of China's overall purchasing power vis-a-vis the rest of the world?
I think indeed in the past few years, the purchasing power of the Chinese consumers moves back quickly. And on the other hand, that in China's market, because China's offline retailing infrastructure is not very developed. So the online retailing service pick up quickly. This topic talk about Alibaba again, the number one in the world retailing sector, reminded me actually a year ago I visited Alibaba, and at that time Jack Ma mentioned about his conversation with CEO of Walmart, and he told Walmart CEO that one day Alibaba may surpass Walmart in sales. I didn't anticipate they come so quickly.
Okay, right, that's kind of interesting. What about you, Professor Wolf, from the United States? It comes pretty quick, isn't it?
Yeah, so it comes very quickly. To us, Alibaba sits at the crossroads of two major trends reshaping the Chinese and indeed the global economy. That's a shift, particularly in China, toward a much more consumer-focused economy, and it's also a shift online. So who is best positioned to sort of reap the rewards of more consumption of goods and services both in China and more global consumption of goods and services produced in China? Obviously, Alibaba is front and center on that. And in additional to that, our lives are moving online, and as our lives move online, our consumption moves online. So if you look at the shaping trends of the 21st century, Alibaba literally sits right at the crossroad of those two trends and enjoys a market share position in China that few American companies would ever occupy in their home market.
Right, that's interesting. We're going to talk a little bit about the American market, the global market vis-a-vis the Chinese market. But for now, let me go to you, Professor Liu. I remember there was an interesting personal bet going on between Alibaba's Jack Ma and also Mr. Wang Jianlin, who's one of China's tycoons as well, majored at the very beginning on real estate. Then he also moved to many other areas, movies, for example. But they were having a bet a year ago as to whether by the year 2020, 50% of retail will come from online. Of course, Jack Ma said yes, and Mr. Wang said probably not. What do you think by the year 2020? We only got 4 years to go.
Well, he has also threatened the society. You know, if he loses, the society loses. So, therefore, actually, right now, in terms of the total market retail share, the online sales for last year took roughly 12%, but the rate of increase has been incredible by 33%.
But you also have to look at the decrease of the speed of the increase. In fact, only a few years ago it was 70%, 70% increase. Now we talk about 30% or so, likely to be about 18 to 17% not long from now.
Well, actually, if you see the retail increase has been kept steady at roughly 10 to 11%. It is estimated even in sort of negative mode that by 2020 the online sales shall continue to stay at least at 18%. So therefore, I think Jack Ma is most likely on the winning side.
Really, Professor Wu?
I think, of course, there are several factors contribute to this. First of all, that the explosion of the consumption, particularly in China market, right? On the other hand, indeed, the online sales would take off some sales off from on-site, right? That is, I think in the longer term, probably the real shopping, that probably more like the demos, right? People visited shops to see that different kind of the styles and they experience the goods, and then they maybe go to online to purchase the goods.
So we're probably going to see the styles changing. In fact, the business model change as well.
Consumers experience.
Yes,
right? And they need to offline experience and online click the button then to get the goods delivered.
Alibaba is a legend. So is Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba. However, the business has not gone ahead without controversies. There are a lot of controversy involved. For example, the protection of intellectual property rights, the fake goods. Many have accused that have been a big problem for Alibaba. Professor Liu, has that problem been solved?
Well, the problem has been going on for quite a while. Number one, because this business model is still relatively new and it's a game changer. And right now, for the fake products, China is rampant anywhere, both online and offline. But it is even worse for online because people have a sense of invisibility and they try their chance. And
So you mean it hasn't been resolved?
It
has
has
or
not been.
It has not.
The
But then,
still
Professor
hasn't
Wolf
been.
from New York, let me ask you about this. As Alibaba has already become the biggest retailer of the world, it is not only the business size that should be impressive, but also the ethics and responsibilities of business. Any specific business becoming the biggest or the largest or the most impressive has to shoulder certain kinds of responsibilities. What do you make of the speed of that, not necessarily catching up with the speed of the business development? Can that be solved? Because China is experiencing really fast speed growth. However, what you guys have resolved over the decades, China probably has to resolve within just a few years. But is it realistic, Professor Wolf?
So it's realistic to make progress. I don't know if you can get all the way to the goal right away, but I think there are valuable lessons in Walmart. So Walmart was very late to realize how important it had become in the US and how much attention and focus came on it. And it really hurt the company. It slowed their growth for a decade. So once you become as large, as dominant, really as definitive of a market as Walmart was, or certainly as Alibaba is, you are basically responsible for the conduct of an industry. And if you're responsible for an emerging industry and an emerging economic superpower, the eyes of the world will literally be upon you. And you have to act as though you understand that. The joke is dance like no one's watching. If you run this company, dance like everyone's watching, because they are.
All right. How does Jack Ma dance? How is that dance now, Professor Wu?
I think Alibaba in that new platform and this new kind of the business model, Alibaba, like Jack Ma, must also facing the new challenges. For instance, I think, of course, we talk about fake product. Actually, we observed that in Taobao, actually, they just provide the platform. That's other merchandise selling the goods. And they have to, strengthen the policing of the product. But on their own shop store, and they would have better quality. That means they need to do some particular effort to manage that kind of sales. Right. And they have to balance that generate revenues and put more merchandise into the platform. On the other hand, they have to make sure that the quality of the goods, right? Because it's their platform, their markets, then they want to do the both. Right?
On the one hand, you see the sales, of course, of the retail has been increasing, and that has made what Alibaba it is today. On the other hand, Professor Liu, you do see Alibaba over the years trying to do some very huge, large-scale promotion. For example, so-called China Singles Day, which has been literally a term being invented. On that day, everybody go online and try to buy some supposed to be much less expensive stuff. But having said that, though, how long will that enthusiasm for purchasing online continue? How much will that marketing campaign work with ever more sophisticated Chinese consumers? Very soon, they're going to learn.
Well, actually, in last year, the single day within 24 hours, that really took 2.5% of the entire retail revenue for the entire China. So this is really a crazy situation. They really met the fad, but I do not think they are really signaling the trend, because yes, I think you are absolutely right. As the middle class is on the rising side, and people get more rational, and already you can see more of the people regret what they bought, through the impulse, the purchase.
Yes,
so
indeed.
So I would think that this shall die down, but people will be more calculative and more rational.
Okay,
I will have
Professor
a
Wu.
different opinion because actually,
ahead.
indeed, the single-day heavy discount indeed bring benefit to the purchasers. Right? That of course there will be shifts some purchasing from other season to that particular single-day festivity, right? And I think in the longer term, that may indeed create something like Thanksgiving shopping, right, in the United States. Right? Of course, every holidays is turned to be consumers' festival.
All right. Well, we hope that will be the case. Of course, you would worry about your family members spending too much time online at that day. But on the other
It's
hand,
only for a day. That's only for a day.
It's only for a day. Okay, all right. but let's focus on one very important issue. Alibaba is now not only just a retailer; it is expanding to so many different industries. For example, into the movie industry, and also into the media as well. We just heard Alibaba not long ago acquired the South China Morning Post, and now that firewall has been put down. In fact, people can go to South China Morning Post online for free. But having said that, though, Mr. Wolf, Professor, what do you make of this rapid expansion of this online platform? Is that necessarily going to be the trend? Can and should Alibaba be more cautious as to where it wants to expand? I know it has a lot of cash on hand, it definitely does, but the thing is, what is the way for this generation of newcomers, in a way, Alibaba included, as well as Amazon? Professor Wolf.
Yeah, so I think it makes a certain sense. I mean, I think Jack Ma and the senior leadership at Alibaba has been very conscious, very aware to kind of follow what Amazon has done. Amazon very famously bought the Washington Post here in the United States, got into the original content business, put out a competitor for Netflix, which is now available in a bunch of countries. It turns out to be pretty smart because what Alibaba is trying to do here is build an ecosystem. Ideally for them, you could live a significant portion of your purchasing life inside their properties. And so you can sort of constantly feed them data about your preferences and constantly feed them, quite frankly, your income in the form of purchases, and that's a little bit the Apple model. So what we're seeing is Alibaba's making unique and Chinese use of a lot of the best business practices of mega retailers and lifestyle dominance all over the world, and Jack Ma is expert at instrumentalizing this and operationalizing it, and of course he's very sensitive to and adapted to the unique dynamics of a very rapidly growing Chinese market. So of course some of these will be failures, but it looks pretty smart overall.
All right, there will be very unique adaptation to the Chinese market and also to the Chinese circumstances. Professor Wu, this is what I want to ask you.
Yes.
China, of course, when it comes to online, there is a very different environment, let's just say, compared to many other countries around the world. And therefore, does industry, or rather a company like Alibaba, being given an advantage as a result in terms of conquering the Chinese market? Will it be competitive worldwide? That is the question.
Alibaba, the whole market of China gave Alibaba an edge in growth, in the size of its business. But next step is that how to bring its practice of this model to other parts of the world. I think Alibaba has been experimented and had made some success. Actually, at the Chinese Spring Festival, I went to Europe. Actually, when the kids they show some drone, they say they bought it from AliExpress. Actually, they have penetrated European market. But of course, what is the influence and dominate market transactions, market penetration, is those markets will not be as easy because they have their own local cultures. But of course, the previous topic we talked about whether Alibaba would turn to be commercial empower, if we not use the word, right? But I think the key here, also in China, there is competition arise in China. Alibaba is not only player, right? There are other players as well.
All right.
Right.
Professor Liu, what do you make of the question that I asked, which is China has a very unique environment when it comes to the internet, and therefore, will the business model here necessarily going to be the business model elsewhere?
The answer is definitely no, because the Alibaba really thrived out of the Chinese culture, and by say, provoking the emotional purchase, and also by working together with the Chinese government, particularly the local government. So they deal with very good PR relationship. But now, when they penetrate into the high-end market, and they will lose the advantage. And plus, that the delivery boys in China, hired from those countries, they gave the competitive advantage in terms of cost. But they may not have so many delivery boys at such a low cost.
All right. There are a lot of topics related to Alibaba. Certainly, that is a very, very significant case study. But for now, we're running out of time. Thank you so much, the three of you, Professor Wu Changji, Professor Liu Baocheng here in Beijing, and also Professor Max Wolf in New York. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend, the three of you. Stay with us here on World Insights. We've got our final segment coming right up. We sit down with the former Prime Minister of Australia, Kevin Rudd, who has a special interest in geopolitical issues. He shares some thoughts on the future of Sino-US Relations. You're watching World Insight on CCTV News. I'm Tian Wei. Chinese President Xi Jinping met with his U.S. counterpart Barack Obama on the sideline of the International Nuclear Security Summit in Washington recently, adding one more bilateral meeting to the already quite impressive list of the two's one-on-one discussions over the years. They have found common ground on issues ranging from climate change to fight against terrorism, from Iran's nuclear talks to the shared aim to denuclearizing the Korean Peninsula. But will those commonalities be sufficient to support a comprehensive relationship between the world's #1 and #2 economies, both of which view the Asia-Pacific region as home turf? Well, that is a question, is indeed. Kevin Rudd, former Australian Prime Minister, is a great resource for perspectives on an issue like this. Fluent in Chinese, he takes pride in being a sinologist and a fan of Chinese culture. However, his experience as Australia's top diplomat and state leader has also given him some empathy toward Washington's mentality, whether in regards to territorial disputes in the East and South China Sea or other issues. Recently, I caught up with him, Kevin Rudd, in Beijing, and let's hear how he articulates these issues. Before we play some excerpts, this first.
A major test for the future of Asia is on the table, and it's centered on the South China Sea. Under President Benigno Aquino III, the Philippines has been keen on making waves over territorial issues in the South China Sea, which has resulted in rising tensions between China and the Philippines. Many believe that disputes over maritime territories have become more complicated because of U.S. involvement. The U.S. has frequently sent warplanes and warships on patrols in the area under the banner of freedom of navigation. This week, the 12-day annual U.S.-Philippines military exercises have begun near disputed waters in the South China Sea, with unprecedented participation of U.S. allies. Australia is participating this year, and Japan has been invited as an observer for the first time. In recent years, various issues have created frictions between the U.S. and China. How the two countries navigate these problems will determine the future of the bilateral relationship.
The regional issues that could be of concern and difficult.
Well, yes, I'm a complete realist about these things. So, global cooperation through the UN, through the Security Council, even on Iran, even on other complex questions, including climate change, tick. Pretty good. The closer we get to home, the harder it gets. And that's where you have forward US military deployments, which go back to the end of the Second World War, here in East Asia and the West Pacific. And China's view, strategic view, that these alliances and these deployments are no longer necessary in a post-Cold War environment. So we have complex, what I describe as diplomatic management challenges. How do we arrive at a common position to avoid conflict by accident will test everyone's skills.
You have a China, as you described earlier, becoming much more active and even proactive in international politics.
That's true.
Of course, also in regional politics as well. What would that mean for the rest of the region and the rest of the world?
When we look at China's increasingly activist, and I've used the term proactive, foreign policy posture across the world, it's kind of natural. It's a big country. You're the second largest economy in the world. You've got a lot going on in the world. And so it follows that you will not simply be Tao Guang Yang Hui, hide your strength, bide your time, forever. That's kind of natural. And when you saw, I think, the reported comments of Xi Jinping at the Foreign Policy Work Conference in November of 14, he was articulating a reality which already existed. China has global economic interests, China has global political interests, and China is therefore going to be globally active. Even on simple questions, but hard questions at the same time, like you've got a major security crisis in North Africa, suddenly you've got 10, 15, 20,000 Chinese nationals you've got to evacuate.
That's right.
What do you do? So China can't simply stay behind locked doors and saying, "我不知道." So there's a natural element to this. And it's good to see China more active in the United Nations system, more active in the UN Security Council.
What about neighborhood safety?
Yeah, I'll come on to that. Now, regionally, in the Asia-Pacific region, yes, you have many conflicting perspectives. The American perspective, very bluntly, is this. They defeated Japan in the war. They decided strategically to remain in the region since then in order to preserve regional peace and stability, because prior to that there was none. And their argument is that that peace and stability has underpinned the unprecedented economic growth of East Asia over the last 30 years. And they'll say that occurred because no one ever thought of actually turning any of their territorial disputes into a large-scale war. People forgot about military questions, they got on with making money. And it's been pretty good. Now, the Chinese perspective is quite different. Chinese perspective is, okay, we sort of understand some of that. And thank you, you did participate in the anti-Japanese war, even though Japan invaded China in the 1930s and you guys in America only woke up about it in 1941. We understand that. But in the period since 49 or 45, or at least since the Korean War in 53, why are you still here? Why do you believe you have a unique strategic role to provide what you describe as peace and stability?
Well, Chinese government has said it very clearly the United States is a big Asia-Pacific power, and China would like to work with that within the system and in order to improve the neighborhood relations. The only thing China doesn't like, it seems, from the Chinese side, is the United States playing a role of taking side.
The American response to that, and I talk to them a lot about this, would be, okay, on the territorial disputes in the South China Sea and the East China Sea, well, let's take the South China Sea in itself. They take no position. What they say they're not neutral on is what they describe as freedom of navigation. And this is where it gets really complicated.
There are different interpretations of what freedom of navigation is.
And there are massively different interpretations.
That's right, and there are different clauses of international law that each side can subscribe to. All of these.
So, and unfortunately, I'm very familiar with most of this. And so therefore...
I'm sure you do, sir.
And so therefore, the practical challenge is recognizing the Chinese position, understanding there are different positions by many of the neighboring states, and understanding the historical position of the US in terms of what they describe as freedom of navigation. How do we have a system of regional diplomacy which manages all these disagreements? Let's bear in mind that for most of the period since 1949, the South China Sea hasn't been an issue. So it may be idealistic of me, but how do we get back to a position whereby it's no longer an issue, so that we can all get on with the business of, shall I say, common economic development? Remember, with the East China Sea, until that crazy decision by an earlier Japanese government to go and, buy the island for their own reasons. I mean, they thought in some respects they were doing the right thing because the governor of Tokyo, I think it was at the time, was about to privatize it and turn it into an anti-Chinese crusade. But leave that to one side. As a result of those changes, China reacted. But after a period of time, things in the East China Sea have stabilized. And relations between Beijing and Tokyo at present are reasonable.
I'm not sure whether the relations between China and Japan on the historical issues and on the territorial issues can be described as reasonable, as you just said. And meanwhile, what kind of mechanism are you trying to prescribe or suggest here in order to bring back, as you describe, as peace and stability as it used to be, because things have already changed?
I don't think I described positions as being reasonable one way or the other. What I said was the state of Chinese-Japanese relations was now reasonable compared with the past. And if you go to Tokyo today and Beijing today and talk about the Sino-Japanese relationship compared with 3 years ago, there's been a big change in the right direction. It hasn't solved the problems underneath it all in terms of the conflicting territorial positions, but what I'm looking for is how do we obtain that level of, shall I say, reasonable stability.
But tension could come back at any moment as
true.
a result of unresolved disputes.
That's true, but that's the case with unresolved territorial disputes along the 38th parallel between North and South Korea, between South Korea and Japan over unresolved territorial questions, between South Korea and China. Certainly between China and Japan in the East China Sea. Then you have the great question of national reunification concerning Taiwan. You head to the South China Sea, you've got all those problems. You've got unresolved questions between Cambodia and Thailand. That's before we get to the Sino-Indian border and the Sino-Pakistan border. So there's lots of these problems in our region. The question is, are we going to use diplomacy to manage them, or is our diplomacy not going to be sufficient to prevent conflict by act?
The question is, if I understand, Mr. Prime Minister, is whether China and the United States can work together in one region, for example, the Asia-Pacific region, while recognizing each other's status, both in the region and probably in the future.
Exactly.
Since 1949, China-US relations have evolved from tense standoffs to a complex mix of intensifying diplomacy, growing international rivalry, and increasingly intertwined economies. In 1972, U.S. President Richard Nixon visited China at the invitation of Premier Zhou Enlai, starting the process of normalizing China-US relations. The two countries officially established diplomatic relations at the ambassadorial level in 1979. In recent years, China has played an increasing role in major regional and international issues, which has deepened China-US cooperation, but has also resulted in some inevitable twists and turns. As the two countries work to establish a new type of power relationship, the key to success surely lies in expanding common interests, controlling differences, and applying diplomatic wisdom.
You argued, Mr. Prime Minister, that China and the United States, in order to establish better confidence about one another and strategic trust, has to have one central strategy.
Well, I think we should not overestimate complexity. Sometimes we say it's all too complex, therefore there is no solution. I don't see it that way. In Chinese you have an expression which is 治大国
Peng
Xiaoxian.
Meaning,
essentially,
help our international viewers with that.
well, no, it's an expression which in my view is about how you frankly simplify strategic concepts into something which is doable. If you look at the transcripts of Nixon and Kissinger's discussions with Mao and Zhou Enlai in 1972, they were dealing with questions of high politics at the height of the Cold War, the height of the Vietnam War, and yet between them they were able to carve out, frankly, a new architecture for how the US and China would engage each other for the future, paving the way for what then happened with Deng Xiaoping later in that decade. So political leadership can deal with these things. And if you look at those records, they were dealing with questions of what do we have in common, what don't we have in common, and how do we cooperate on the things that we have in common. So when I look at China and US current challenges, it's a bit the same. What's my own recommended formulation? It's what I've described in English as constructive realism, and in Chinese it's 建设性的现实主义. But what I mean by that is, what's realist here? In a realist way, acknowledge the 4 or 5 areas where at present China and the US cannot agree. East China Sea, South China Sea, maybe cyber, maybe human rights. And be clear about that. Also have a management mechanism so that none of these blow up and destroy the entire relationship. Then over here, you've got a whole bunch of common interests in areas which are hard, but where you can cooperate and produce real results.
Such as what?
North Korea. It's a big one. It's a huge one. If the North Koreans acquire a nuclear-tipped missile capable of targeting Japan, Korea, or capable of targeting Guam or Hawaii or the West Coast, let me tell you, the strategic impact of that across our region will be disastrous in terms of the reactions that it will bring about. So that is a hard one, but it's doable in terms of high-level US and Chinese cooperation. Then you've got easier ones, which are sometimes in the security space, but sometimes in the non-security space, like climate change. So my overall argument is, like my argument concerning an Asia-Pacific community, which is if through constructive realism you can be constructive about these difficult problems, constructive about some of the easier areas of cooperation, and realist about where you can't agree for the foreseeable future. That is a strategic concept that you can work with for the future.
May I scrutinize just a little bit what you have just suggested?
Scrutinize,
for example,
scrutinize away.
Such as the DPRK issue. We did see China and the United States together with many other important players through the UN Security Council come up with resolution 22-7. And however, when you see the details of the policy explanation coming from different sides, it could be a little bit interesting. For example, Mr. Prime Minister, you know this better than I do, that China advocates about full implementation of the Security Council resolution, which includes sanctions and a lot of efforts to be made on negotiation and dialogue, and also make sure that the regime is not going to fall, eventually going to lead to all kinds of disasters in the region, unpredictable. However, you see the Western countries, particularly the United States, pretty much advocates on the sanction part and applauded China on that specific effort to work with the US on the sanctions. So you see all these details are very different as a result of a different foreign policy emphasis and also agendas. So even on these very common ground that you mentioned, there seem to be very different issues. Secondly, if I could, Mr. Prime Minister, the United States has been struggling with these priorities, what it cares, and what are the priority list for example, the Obama administration, not to even mention the incoming new administration, unpredictable. So all of these, will they ever work even on some of the most important issues that you see as common ground?
Well, in diplomacy, like in life, you can either focus exclusively on the negative, or you can choose to focus on the positive.
That's true.
And turn the negative into positive over time. That's my basic philosophy in life.
Help me to be more positive, Mr. Prime Minister.
So therefore, what you have in that UN Security Council resolution is a toughly negotiated 2-week-long process between the US, China and Russia, effectively, on a balanced and strong resolution. And you're right, there are different emphases within the resolution. But it's not unique in international relations for one side to come and say, hey, the resolution says that, and for the other side to say, the resolution says this.
That's true.
It's not the first time it's happened in the world. It's happened hundreds of times before. The key thing is that there is a resolution. And I believe there is an obligation to, on behalf of the international community, to enforce the sanctions regime, but also to take seriously the question of how do you dialogue effectively with Pyongyang. There are multiple internal proposals for how that could or should proceed. And I'm in the old-fashioned school, which simply says it's better to talk than not to talk. Because if you're not talking, the problem's likely to get worse. So, as an example...
I'm not sure whether it's an old-fashioned school. It's rather a responsible school you're talking about.
Well, yeah, I'm a professional optimist. And in fact, in global diplomacy, I think it is too easy for people to say, this is unfixable, this is unsolvable, it's too complex, it's too hard. We need a different psychology of international relations, which is, okay, how do we simplify this? What are the core moving parts in this complex diplomatic puzzle, whether it's the Middle East, whether it's Syria, whether it's Iraq, or whether it's elsewhere. And what can we do? Where are the intersecting sets of interest that we can work on?
Right.
In other words, it's a mindset. Otherwise, you have international diplomacy just going round and round in circles, and having one 座谈会, sit-down meeting, after another,
without any results.
Without any results.
Yeah. Well, that's Kevin Rudd, the former Australian Prime Minister, sharing his analysis about how the United States and China, two of the world's most powerful countries, are going to and should deal with each other in the Asia-Pacific region and beyond. Kevin Rudd joked about himself as a professional optimist. We wish him well on that and only hope there will be more in the Asia-Pacific region and between China and the United States, whose optimism can be backed by more sophisticated diplomacy and trust. Well, that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of a program, visit our website. Just type in World Insight CCTV News into your search engine. You will be able to find us, or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone at the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again next week for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night and have a great weekend.